Good morning, everybody. Yes, we do have sound. We're just letting you all settle in. And in a moment, we're going to kick off. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on our new report that's been launched on the state of our rivers. The report was launched on Friday, and we had a session with Minister Powell, head of EA, and lots of different guests joining us for that launch. But the purpose of today's session is to dig into the content of the report a bit more, and to introduce you to what we've put in there, why we've put it in there, and how you can use the report, as well as we hope for this session to be a little bit more interactive and to give you a chance to ask some questions about what we're doing and how we can improve it in the future as well. So my name's Christine Colvin. I'm the Director for Partnerships and Communications with the Rivers Trust. And I'm assuming that my colleague Dave Johnson is here as well. Dave, you're still on mute. I'll just let Dave introduce himself.
Morning, everyone. I'm Dave Johnson, Technical Director of the Rivers Trust.
Thanks, Dave. And the way that we're going to try and do it is we're going to actually I'll share my screen with the report on it, and we'll do the deep dive into some of what we've been calling the nerd maps as well. Because there's a lot of data that sits behind the maps that we'll be sharing, sometimes it can be a little bit slow when we're zooming at the same time. If that doesn't work, then we have a backup with a presentation that we can share. But we're hoping that we can just do it live and work from the report itself. So let's kick that. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my screen now. And I can just give you the first introduction to the report. So I'm going to kick off talking about the summary that we have, which of course draws attention to the headlines that most of our rivers are not in a good state of health. Only 14% are achieving good ecological health, and none are achieving good overall health. And the biggest offenders and the sectors that are impacting the state of our rivers the most, according to the Environment Agency data, is agriculture, so farming, and the water industry, particularly wastewater treatment. So of course, we'll go into the details behind that. And I think what I'd just like to emphasize in this section is that we also try and help the users to make sense of what this means, and really introduce them to what does this look like on their local river. That was really one of the objectives for us, was bringing a lot of this data that we know is already available, that's held, a lot of it on the catchment database and various different sources, but to make it more accessible and more easy to immediately make sense of, and to fit that into the big picture, the big narratives that people are hearing about at the moment, which are very much around the climate crisis. And we're saying that rivers really are in the front line of the climate crisis, and we need to be investing in their recovery a lot more if we're going to adapt and achieve resilience to the shocks that are going to come with the climate crisis. And also how rivers are faring in terms of our nature emergency as well, and loss of species around the world. So that's very much the objective of this report, is to bring data to the fore, let you find out what's happening on your particular stretch of river that you like to use, and then put it in a context that helps people to make much more sense of what's going on. So we of course give the overview, and we've got the main sections of the report. You can find the report on the Rivers Trust website. It's under the key issues section, and it's the top of those key issues now, state of our rivers. There's a link there that will take you directly into the report. Of course, you know, we also want people to appreciate all the incredible and beautiful things about our rivers, and a lot of this report brings us some of the bad news. but we do highlight the incredible natural heritage that England has, particularly around the chalk streams. We know it's not all about chalk streams, but they're very easy to fall in love with. These beautiful photographs of grayling and trout from Paul Coley, water photographer. But we dive straight in to the current state of our rivers. And this is where the report starts getting much more interactive. So we introduce the reader to, what healthy, moderately healthy, and unhealthy rivers look like, so that, again, to help make sense of the way that we're describing rivers in the more detailed maps that are to come. And so as we get into the assessment of the health of our rivers, we see this very sad state of affairs for rivers in England. Right now, I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Dave to talk a bit more about this interactive piece.
Okay, morning everyone. So I think before I start on the just going through the maps, I think it's worth saying that although we take a weight of evidence approach, so the narrative that Christine's been talking about is based on the weight of evidence, but that doesn't. So what we're presenting here is evidence from different areas, which is in general gives us the picture that we see, but specifically in your catchment, it can be representative or not so representative. And the whole point is that all data's wrong, but most data is useful, and that's what we're trying to get to here. So we've got the first map is the river status. We've got 5 classes, bad through to high. And as you zoom in, you can identify the class associated with your particular river. And as I said before, we know there are issues with the way this data is generated, but it's one source of evidence, and it's actually a very good place to start. So if you click on any particular river or stream, you just get a pop-up to give you its status. And then you can dig in and get greater data if you're more detail if you're interested in your particular stream from the Catchment Data Explorer. But of course, rivers are just part of a catchment system. So what we wanted to do is, rather than just focus just on rivers, as you scroll down through the report, you can look at the status of the canals and lakes, and because of course they're both fed from rivers and feed into rivers, and then you've got the coastal fed by rivers, and finally the groundwater, which again both gains and loses from rivers. So we're trying to kind of encourage that more catchment-based approach, so that you can really you understand all the environmental components, right? So those are the ecological status. Next, we move on to the chemical sort of health, and here we've got the picture that pretty much all the rivers are in poor state of health, and I think we did think quite carefully before we put this on, because it does send out a rather a very negative message, and you kind of wonder what's the point of this. Well, I think the main thing that comes out of it is that it's legacy chemicals that are causing those in large part those failures. And so what we're trying to say is not that we can't do anything about it, it's just trying to avoid this situation with upcoming pollutants. So it's a kind of, again, trying to be realistic about the data, showing what it is, and then thinking about what it means in the future. Okay, so those are the status maps. If we then dig into the nerd map, we can actually start picking apart why it's in poor ecological or chemical health. And this diagram at the start helps us realize that it's actually quite complicated. And there are a whole number of different things that are measured. to identify both the ecological and the chemical health. So if we jump into the ecological diagram, and what we've tried to do here is, again, allow you to flip between the different elements. So in this case, fish, if we just switch that one on. And fish help, the health of fish. Each of the elements is, there's a technical method that assesses whether fish health is high through to bad, and the results are summarized here, and the output that you see for your particular stream is useful, but it may not be 100% correct, because of course it's based on the data that's available in that particular stream, and it's based on where the assessment points are. So if you go in and find that you look at the data related to your particular stream, and you're thinking, I don't particularly agree with that. Part of the point of giving you all the data is so that you can look not just at the fish, then you can go down and look at the inverts. So we've got the inverts there, and then you can go down and look at the physical chemical properties like phosphorus and ammonia. And that's what I was talking about earlier, that kind of weight of evidence. If everything's pointing in the same direction, you begin to get a much more coherent picture. And this ammonia one's quite an important one, actually, because it allows me to make another point. So, ammonia is very short-lived in our rivers. It rapidly oxidizes. And so the monitoring actually is going to pick up a very small part of the problem. So publishing data like this isn't saying that this is right. It's saying this is the data we have at the moment. But what we really need to do is kind of, as I say, you look at all the different data sources and build up your evidence base. So if you're seeing poor ecology, for example, and you're sure it's something to do with ammonia, but these maps don't show that, then really what that's telling you is, let's dig in, let's collect more data, let's try and understand it. The current understanding is that ammonia is not the issue, but it may be because, for example, ammonia tends to be emitted more at night time than it is during the rest of the day. And it's a similar sort of situation with phosphate, where it is representative of a bit more representative of the problem, but again, phosphate is the loss of phosphate is a kind of event driven. So if you're monitoring at the right time, you'll pick it up. If you're not monitoring at the right time, you won't pick it up. So again, you have to pile up all the evidence in order to get a good feel. But the point is, what we've tried to do is make it easy to do that for your particular stream. If we carry on down to the chemicals, here it's the same picture really. We've tried to pick off the main chemical tests, so the sort of specific pollutants, and then if we carry on down, we'll get to priority substances and priority hazardous substances. And again, it's there to help build that understanding, but you've always got to, in your mind, have that kind of slightly cynical view when you're looking at this data, because it is based on monitoring. And if that monitoring is not good enough, the picture that it gives you won't be good enough. And this is the map that really shows the legacy issues with PFOS and PBDEs and so forth. So those are the main maps that we've got on kind of current health, and then the reasons for that current health. And as I say, we've put as much detail as we could in there, and we've symbolized it to make it as easy to access as possible. But if you want to get into all the different attributes, data attributes that are in there, then you can use the Catchment Data Explorer, which I believe is being relaunched again today, or a new version is, and that gives absolutely all the data. I'll hand back to Christine now.
Thanks, Dave. So in the current state section, we introduce the reader to the reasons for failure. And of course, for those of you who aren't as familiar with this water data, the Environment Agency assesses potential reasons for failure for all of those river water bodies that don't achieve good ecological health. And these are the different sectors that are resulting in failure, essentially, of our river water bodies. So we can see that the largest of those is agriculture and rural land management, which results in failure in 2,296 of our 3,700 odd river water bodies around England. And when we summarize this data, you know, we talk about, in fact, let me go to the infographic that summarizes these quite complicated statistics that we have around reasons for not achieving good ecological status. So you'll see that 60% is as a result of agriculture and rural land management. Up to 55% is as a result of the water sector. And up to 20 to 30% is a result of urban issues and transport. Now, the reason that those don't add up to 100% in total is because any one river water body can be impacted by several different sectors. You know, I think that makes sense if we just try and envisage the landscape and the different things that can affect rivers. And why we've decided to say up to 60% or 55% here is because of the varying levels of confidence that the Environment Agency express in relation to the different reasons for not achieving good status. So with agriculture, there's a lower degree of confidence. With the water sector, because that's very often linked to point sources of pollution, there is a higher degree of confidence. And again, we have a nerd map and there's a link to it here of why our rivers aren't in a healthy condition, that goes into the data in more detail and explains it in a lot more detail. I think we're not going to dive in there right now. If it's relevant for the questions, then we'll come back there. But these sectors obviously have a lot of different activities within them. And this is where we kind of unpack to the level of activities, the degree of impact that our river water bodies are experiencing. So the single largest activity that's impacting on rivers, apart from the different sectors, is treated sewage effluent discharge. So that's continuous discharge of sewage effluent, which is still having a negative impact, mainly on water quality as a result of increasing levels of pollution into our rivers. And then the next highest single activity is poor nutrient management, essentially around fertilizer management on agricultural land. And in rural areas. So both of these big impacting activities contributing to nutrients that we're finding, and Dave just showed you the phosphate map in particular of England, contributing to part of our nutrient problem around the country. I wonder if at this point we should just have a quick, I need to kind of have a separate look at the Q&As to see, so that this can be an interactive session. So I'm going to call on Dave to help me with answering some of these questions that are here. So from Michael, one of the biggest gaps in the data is the identity of the organizational person accountable for water quality. Supply chains can help out, but only if we engage. I think that's more of a comment there. But yeah, I think that's a fair comment to put in. Just coming down to Adrian, any plans to showcase similar maps for Wales, Scotland and Ireland? Adrian, yes, we hope to for the next version of the State of Our Rivers report, because obviously the Rivers Trust represents our members more widely in other parts of the country as well, in other nations as well. So yes, we do have plans to extend there. I think the thing is around making sure that we can have equivalent representation from the different ways that we're measuring the different impacts and the ecological health of our rivers. And from Simon, oh, it's dropped down. Treated sewage effluent discharge is the single most impactful activity. What does that say about the way discharge consents are set, monitored, and compliance enforced? Well, I think the data really speaks volumes that we're not seeing treatment up to standards, and that we definitely need much stronger enforcement of those standards, and that's one of the conclusions of the report as well. Dave, do you want to make a comment there as well?
Well, the next one is from Beth about continue to explore the ecological health maps, and there's quite a lot of grey on there. And that's absolutely right. So that's, you know, it's always useful to put that on there. So that's where it's not assessed either because there's not the data to assess it, or that particular test is not relevant for that reach. So again, it's just being transparent about the data so we know what the agency knows and what it doesn't know.
And Kevin's put in a question as well about the infographic is great, but doesn't make the link between the elements. In other words, how does a household contribute to these by buying food, cleaning, transport, etc.? Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kevin. And I think in putting the report together, we wanted to strike a balance. At the end, when we have the take action section, we talk about, you know, the food that you eat can actually have a much bigger impact than, for instance, turning off the tap while you're brushing your teeth. But at the same time, we didn't want to bring everything down to the individual and household level, because there's a lot of sector responsibility and government and enforcement responsibility to talk about in the information.
I think also, Kevin, with those, we do actually use those maps, the reasons for not achieving good, as a really good way of targeting what people can do on an individual basis in their catchment. So where are we going to get the greatest benefit from them changing their behaviour? So we do make use of those maps in quite a few of our water stewardship outputs for exactly that reason, to try and link people to their own behaviour and what will make the most difference in their catchment. So I think it's a really good point.
Yeah. And Andrea, your question around, is there information about untreated sewage coming from static houseboats? I think that's, we don't have data on that. If there is data, then we'd love to include it in the next version. And I know that our colleague Annika France just had a great odyssey from Bristol to London on a SUP. Over 10 days, and she said that some of the most visible and obvious pollution on the canals and rivers, including the Kennet and the Thames that they were travelling on, was waste from houseboats and from canals and barges. So it, you know, that's definitely something that needs to be tackled in a lot.
I think before we move on, which we need to do, Christian, I think that Alistair's asked a really good question about reliability. Now, one of the things that we've done in the NERD map is start to point out about confidence, so that we've got an idea of how confident we should be about each piece of data. So I think that's absolutely critical, and we've tried to incorporate it a little bit in this report, but I think it's something that we need to do more of in the future, so that people, you know, it's coming back to my initial comment, all data's wrong, most data is useful, and it's how useful it is related to confidence. Should we move on now?
We can move on. Thank you for those questions. We'll come back at the end if we've got more time, and also very happy to kind of pick up after the webinar as well. So having given the outline of the current state, how it's measured with those supporting NERD maps behind it, so we're really trying to emphasize to you that this report's constructed in layers, and I keep getting requests for printed versions. It's only an online report because you need to access all of this data that sits behind it. We then come on to the big problems that are facing our rivers. So really what we're trying to do in this section is say that many of these activities and issues and the nutrient problems, for instance, they are kind of these big, wicked, complex, interconnected problems. And of course, you know, rivers really are at the confluence of the great crises of our age, the crisis of the loss of nature. And this is a global measure from WWF, their Living Planet report, that shows loss of wildlife populations overall globally since 1970 has fallen by a really staggering 68%. But it has been worst felt, worse than in the oceans, worse than in rainforests. It's worst felt in freshwater ecosystems. So our freshwater ecosystems, including rivers and their wetlands in floodplains, are really at the crux of this crisis. We cover a lot of the pollution issues, and obviously something that's, you know, very visibly obvious to most river users is litter, plastic, that's, you know, very persistent in our environments at the moment, particularly wet wipes. Anybody who saw the Panorama episode on sewage over spills saw the Barnes Reef, you know, the wet wipes are changing the way our sediments are forming in rivers at the moment. And of course, this real biggie is around climate change. This fabulous GIF that went viral from Neil Kay at the Met Office, the shaded area is our old normal. That was our normal average temperature, around 8.3, 8.4 degrees centigrade with average rainfall. And as that temperature has climbed over the last couple of decades, but particularly visibly in the last decade and a half, we've seen the increase in average rainfall that goes with it, and not just the averages that are important, but the fact that we're getting more extreme events as well. So of course, you know, that affects how we drain our towns and cities and the land around it. And many of you will be familiar with our sewage map, and this is where that nerd button takes us to. Sorry, I've just tried to have them lined up in advance to save the loading time. So we've got all of this sewage data that's incorporated into the State of Our Rivers report. I'm sorry, I'm missing the Zoom functions on here. I can't get to them because they're behind some of the webinar things. But on this, you can zoom right in. Oh, sorry, I'm just being really silly about that. I can get right in if I just move it around. You can dig right into your area and come down to my home turf down here, and we can see here's the River Test, another one of our beautiful chalk rivers, and yet here's an individual storm overflow that has spilled for a total of 2,200 hours, 124 different occasions in 2020. So very, very detailed information that sits on our CSO map, which is the combined sewer overflow map.
I think it's worth saying, actually, just before we move on from that one, Christine, that, you know, although those dots on the map tell us a certain amount of data about number of spills, what they don't tell us about is impact of those spills, and that data is available. And part of our kind of approach is to daylight the data that is available, as in those dots on the map, and then start trying to get the impact data, which has been derived by the water industry, so that we can put that on there as well, so we can see the ones of those spills that are really having the biggest impact. So I think that's, you know, that's all part of this kind of process of daylighting more and more data. So if I go on now to the flooding part of the big problems, because what we know is that this current situation, this is surface water flooding, so this is number of is indicative flood risk for surface water. And each of these squares gives you an estimate of the number of residential properties, business properties, and so forth at risk. And then we've also got the fluvial flooding from rivers and sea on there as well, which is what people are perhaps a bit more familiar with. Now, if I'm honest, I would have, what we were trying to do with this section of the report was we wanted people to be able to identify, put a dot on the map and show their upstream catchment, so the catchment that was contributing to the flood risk, and then put another dot on the map and show where their activities were contributing to downstream flood risk. And that widget that we didn't put into the report was working until a week before the report went public, and unfortunately it stopped. So what we've been able to do is put the data in there, which is all accessible, but it was less interactive in this particular case than we would have liked. But it still shows it still gives a feel for the picture in terms of flood risk. And then if we go further down, we've got the same thing in terms of abstraction. And so if we go to the NERD, well, we know that there's a big issue coming in terms of abstraction. That's the kind of the jaws of death, the kind of where demand exceeds supply. And if we go into the NERD map, again, what we're trying to do is allow people to access the data in their for their particular catchment, so they can see how much water is available at low. We've picked low flows. That's the flow that's only exceeded 5% of the time for this particular map. And again, what we're trying to do is really help people identify what the situation is in their particular catchment, so that it starts leading that kind of that discussion about how do we share out that the water that's available, and this map is just the kind of start of that kind of process. So that's the I think actually getting into more detail in terms of the sharing of water. We've got a great project that we're doing at the moment that is really kind of trying to understand how we can actually share water between the different water users, all of whom have just reasons for using the water. But this map is just the start of that debate, really. I think if we then, do you want to do some more questions?
Sure.
If there is anything.
Let's have a look here and see if there's some that we can pick up. So we've got a question about how up to date is this data? And Dave, do you want to talk about when the data was accessed?
Yeah, what we do is we download the data from the Catchment Data Explorer if it's Environment Agency data. But we're always trying to get the most recent data. This data was from 2019, from the 2019 assessment. So yeah, that's all I can say, really. We get the most recent data and then we just keep on updating it. I mean, we are, it's not that difficult for us because we also supply all the data to the catchment partnerships, the catchment-based approach. So we're constantly checking what data is available and making sure we update the evidence base so that we're all, basing our understanding on the most recent data.
And there's a great question here from Stuart Clark, talking about the showing all the different types of water bodies, but saying it would be great to bring in other data such as citizen science data to give a better picture of all waters. Is this planned? Dave, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it's certainly planned. About 3 or 4 years ago, we have a data and evidence forum that we run every year, and we always do some voting there. We bring the whole evidence community together, or as much of it as we can gather. We get more every year, and the question that we asked in that first one for people to vote on was, what's the biggest opportunity? And they identified exactly this, the idea of citizen science. And so that whole process started kind of 4 years ago. We've we put in a big proposal for a citizen science monitoring cooperative, and we're just waiting now to see what happens with that. So, you know, we're really hopeful. The time is right, definitely, to start bringing in more of that data to fill in the gaps in this evidence base.
And Michael, I hope that answers your question as well, because I think that's how we would plan to fill in the gaps, and to also, you know, help to check the validity of certain data as well, is by, you know, really trying to mobilize the power of a citizen science network around our rivers as well. So a question from Katrina on nutrient neutrality and pollution from urbanization, housing developments close to rivers. Is there any information about whether Natural England has issued its promised guidelines for councils, planners and developers on this important river health issue?
I'm aware that they have issued some guidance recently on the role of wetlands in nutrient neutrality, and I'm also aware that ourselves and the Constructed Wetlands Association are actually going to release some design guidance. We're just getting together to produce that at the moment. So I don't know if that helps with that particular question, but those are the things that I'm aware of.
Okay, so we'll come back to questions again in a minute, but for now we will move on to big solutions, because, you know, we're trying to wrap up a lot of the issues and point out how interconnected they are in big problems, but also, you know, that we do have the science and technology and understanding to know how to solve many of these big problems as well. So I think, you know, for us, something that we're really focusing on with the big solutions is this kind of next generation of green infrastructure that we want to see implemented alongside our conventional engineered infrastructure, and which is, you know, in support of the wide scale implementation of nature-based solutions. And we've got this quite nice little infographic that it's going quite fast today, despite the fact that we're zooming. So, you know, this is our conventional engineered water system, taking from, you know, water stored in reservoirs, groundwater abstraction, drinking water treatment, through to water users in households and industry, treatment, and then effluent discharge. We're seeing this is still a huge problem in terms of not meeting standards, and of course, you know, the overspills where it's not even getting treated. But we have some solutions proposed for those, which are around really starting to implement at scale nature-based solutions. And we saw announced at the weekend really exciting partnership with DEFRA, the Woodlands Trust, Rivers Trust and National Trust, planting the right trees in the right places, helping to revegetate and rewood and reforest a lot of our riparian areas and catchments to slow the flow in extreme weather events. Also introducing nature-based solutions in towns like permeable pavements and driveways, sustainable drainage, more soakaways, etc., and more wetlands and ponds that can add an extra layer of resilience to the system that we already had, or that we have that's working at the moment. So, you know, the call for nature-based solutions and the current barriers around that is something that we try and promote really strongly. And one of those nature-based solutions is around natural flood management. And I'm going to hand over to Deb again to talk about natural flood management.
Okay, so as Christine goes on to that map, this is a map of the nature-based solutions that have been created over the last couple of years as part of the DEFRA £15 million programme of NFM. And what we're trying to do with this tool is that as communities build nature-based solutions, we, you know, each one of those dots is an asset. And if you scroll down a bit, no, you have to scroll down to the next map. You actually, you know, what we're doing is we're collecting information about each of those assets. And so what you've got here is a dashboard. You can see that it's 44,325 assets have been put in. And for every one of those assets, we collect, you know, pictures. We have an estimate of the benefits that they're providing in terms of flood risk. And the key reason why we're doing this is what we're trying to do is treat nature-based solutions with the same level of respect and seriousness that we treat engineered assets with. We wouldn't build a concrete structure and not understand its condition and what it was doing and make sure that we were looking after it. Well, what we're creating here is a database of our natural assets, and we're allowing communities to register those assets once they've created them. And then critically, what we're trying to do is make sure that those communities can manage those, as they manage those assets, they upload more information in the future, so that, you know, we're looking after the natural assets that are being created. And although this tool started with DEFRA 15 million, we're now just converting it across so that anybody can use it. They're creating nature-based solutions for flood risk. So if we go on to, so that's the nerd map for NFM. I think other things that are, you know, being delivered that are making a change to our environment, and we've got to be realistic about it. This is where the big money is currently being spent. This is the water industry and farmers. So what we've put together here is a map that allows us to focus in and see where farmers are delivering. This is the agricultural one. So these are countryside stewardship schemes and its predecessor schemes. And so you can really zoom in around where you live and find out what's currently going on in terms of what are farmers already delivering in your area. So that's the kind of farming part of the picture. And then if we scroll down, we can see what the water industry is investing in your catchment. So it's called the Water Industry National Environment Plan. And if you zoom in again, you can see where there are actions, which is the kind of swirl, where there are investigations, and where there's monitoring. So again, you know, the whole idea of this is that you put the kind of status data there at the start of the state of the river. You identify that there's an issue, so it's poor status. You identify the problem is phosphorus, and then you can come here and go, what are the farming community already doing about that? What is the water company already potentially doing about that? So it's trying to give a picture, not just the gloomy side of things about what's wrong, but about what's going on. And I think the really exciting thing about this is, you know, if we could get this farm scale delivery and the water company scale delivery, and really make sure that it's coordinated, catchment scale, and working with the partnerships that are existing in each of those catchments. So they're really embedding its the work with partnerships. And, you know, perhaps I'll give an example of that. You know, if you I used to build sewage treatment works in a previous life, and how much better would it be if we knew where that sewage treatment works was going to be, and then we could, when it delivered its benefits in terms of improved water quality, we could build a footpath down there with our local community group so that people could actually benefit from that improvement. So it's that kind of coordination of work that's so important. And then if we go on to this final nerd map, which is all to do with loving rivers and, you know, the kind of the health and well-being. So we've got this, again, what we've tried to do is daylight the data on access to green blue space, and also the health benefit, and also the kind of health of the population. So you can sweep it across and see where access to green space versus levels of obesity, inactivity, and associated illness. So it starts to kind of, again, help us investigate what those kind of links might be in our local area. And all this data is published on data.gov. All that we've done with Ellie from Ribble Rivers Trust is bring it together. And then the final part of this map is really about crowdsourcing data from the wider public, so that we really understand where people are using their rivers for swimming, kayaking, paddling, fishing, all that type of activity. And so this crowdsourcing of data is really useful to the water industry and so forth. So we can start to see where improvements will benefit the most people. And of course, if we, but we also like to harvest data from people. So if you go to the Add Your Own site, we're enabling people to identify their own site and put it on the map. And then we know about it, and then water companies know about it. And we've provided this data to water companies, and hopefully it will help them as they start to really think about and change the health of rivers from a human health point of view, which has been kind of neglected over recent times. So it's, again, it's a two-way process. We're sort of providing data and the narrative to try and understand it, but we're also trying to harvest data from that wider from wider stakeholders, so that we really understand what's going on locally. Okay, Christine, have we got questions?
Yes, let's come to some questions now. Okay, so I think that's that one we've answered already. Let's come down a little bit. Okay, so from Nigel Mortimer, would it be possible to depict how much stormwater overflows might be reduced by SUDs and nutrient excesses by the removal of household sink waste disposal units, helping engaging householders to play their part? Yeah, I think, you know, there's such a lot of good work going on in the SUDS realm in sustainable drainage. There has been a research project looking at more conventional reduction of stormwater overflows through increased engineered storage, and that's going to be coming out, I think, in the next month or two from the CSO task force. But certainly, you know, how SUDs could be much more widely deployed, both for nutrient and flows. It's something that we need to be investigating at the local level, at the community level, and at the local authority level, I think much more widely.
I think it is, you know, there are great examples of where this is being kind of investigated. What you can't do is put those local examples on a map like this, although we could start putting those as case studies maybe in the future. And the way you do that is, which we've done in quite a few catchments now, is you do modelling, and then you're in the position of saying, what if people change their behaviour in this way? What change will that make? And that's the beauty of modelling. And a number of catchment partnerships around the country are starting to take that approach, so that they understand where they can make the most difference and how much difference they can make. So and modelling is a key part of that.
Yeah. And suggestion about linking in from John Snowden, even more data like rainfall, flow, and access to rivers, to help the public make more informed choices about when, where, and how they engage with blue space for health and well-being benefits. That would be an amazing idea. I think that would require a lot of different partners to collaborate with us on that. It's probably beyond what the State of the Rivers report is aiming for at the moment. This is very much a kind of a retrospective, as opposed to presenting live data or enabling sort of, minute by minute decisions. This, we're hoping to help to inform a bigger perspective around the long-term view of rivers. But I think that that would be a really amazing resource to have available. Dave, I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
I know that's fine. I was going to pick up Theo's point about the ecological health maps and the fact that he feels they're quite thin at the moment. I think Theo, it's a fair point. I mean, there's a heck of a lot of data there, and we actually can pull the full all the data in, and including the link to the Catchment Data Explorer. So I think in the future it might make sense to do that. I think that one of the issues that we've always had is that it's actually very easy to overload people with data. What you try and do is what we're trying to do is pick off the most useful data for people. But what I found really good is when we get feedback like this, wouldn't it be really useful to have this data? Well, if we've got it, we'll use it next time. I mean, I think that's the thing. It's an ongoing discussion. What would be really useful to have next time? And then if we can get hold of it, and if it's possible to get hold of, then that's exactly where we want to go. So feedback is good, and will really help us improve this in the future.
An interesting question here from Hayley Kinsey. Is failure to adhere to the current standards the primary issue with treated sewage effluent discharge, or is the primary issue the current level to which the standards are set? And I'm certainly in State of the Rivers report, we don't have the evidence to answer that question. But my sense is that it is around adherence to the current standards, and that's why we need much more resourcing around enforcement. Dave, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah. Yes, I'd probably agree with that. I mean, I think that the easier it's almost certainly that the monitoring is spot sampling, and therefore doesn't pick up issues at night time, and when treatment works are performing less well. I mean, that although that is that's what the invertebrate and the biological monitoring is there for, because they integrate those signals. So if you find that your inverts are suffering, then they may well be telling you about a signal that you're not picking up, in terms of spot sampling of water quality.
Yeah, and a good question from Jennifer about how would you integrate citizen science data with monitored data in a meaningful way. I think that's a real challenge, and that's something that we hope our future work will help to address by making sure that there are proper standards in place for citizen science monitoring, so that the quality of the data that's coming out of that is assured and we have a certain level of confidence in it, and that we have a framework developed through which we can integrate citizen science data with other data that's collected as well. There's a question on flooding here, Dave, from Andy Wendt. Is there a reason you're not using the same categories as the EA for flooding zones?
No, there's no reason. To be fair, we plotted it up in. I thought we had used exactly the same categories certainly for the fluvial. For the surface water maps, the only reason we've done it as indicative flood risk is because the surface water flood maps are so slow to plot. So we kind of reprocessed it to make it more usable in this format, but there shouldn't be any reason. I will have a look at it and see if we've done something different to that. We didn't intend to, apart from the surface water stuff.
And just sort of finishing off on the questions, one from Andrew Ross, 92% of all fresh water is embedded in food. Agri-businesses must report this in their ESG calculation to their investors. They are the target users to engage. Absolutely, Andrew, I think that's a really good point. And just to finish off now, if we're in the take action section, maybe I'll go first to the business section, where we focus on acknowledging water risks in climate and nature disclosures. So that's something that any listed company is going to need to start doing for climate disclosures in the coming year, and nature disclosures, and we expect to be in the next couple of years, and of course setting science-based targets, so making sure that businesses have quantified their impact, both direct and indirect, and then have a transparent roadmap towards improving that. And at the bottom of this section, we give resources to, water stewardship, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, et cetera, where businesses can get more guidance and advice. And of course, the calls to government in this section are around, as we've seen in the discussion this morning, that, currently we are not seeing effective and fair regulation and enforcement. And it's absolutely critical that the government is, and the Environment Agency in particular, is equipped and holding polluters to account so that we can properly enforce the polluter pays principle. And we also want to see a clear mandate coming through to civil society through the catchment partnerships. The catchment-based approach partnerships give a ready-made framework through which important local stakeholders can be engaged. And so we'd like to see that formalised through good governance as well. And I think there's a broader call, even from within the water sector itself, to try and synchronise and simplify the many plans and regulations that affect our rivers and their catchments. We need to see a step towards much more integrated rural and urban planning. And potentially we have a chance to achieve that now with the new planning legislation that will be coming through. We've talked quite a bit about nature-based solutions. And of course, in some areas, government is still reluctant to implement those because of the lack of regulatory frameworks and standards and a clear understanding of what good looks like when they are implemented well, and the support for citizen science. So, we go into details for government, for business, for individuals in this final take action section. And we hope that all of the data that's been put in to the rest of the State of the Rivers report makes sense in terms of adding up to some of these critical things that we're asking for. So we are out of time. I'm amazed that we did get through as much as we did in the last hour. I think Becca, who has set this up and has been with us on the panel here, will save the questions that we haven't got to. I hope I'm not saying that you're going to do something that you can't do, Becca, but hopefully you've got those questions. And I think from my side, I would like to thank you all for joining us this morning and for coming. Encourage you all to use the report really widely and share it. Make sure that it is well used. And just encourage you to engage with us because, this is a first one and we want to build what's relevant in here and make it really useful to everybody who wants to safely enjoy their rivers and see them come back to a much better level of health. So please be in touch with us about that and how we can make that information even more useful for you. Dave, can I hand over to you for the final word?
There was, there was one great question there at the end that I'd kind of like to finish off with. Well, there's a whole series of questions about different data layers that we could include. And what I'd say is, this report is very much the tip of the iceberg. We've got a cover data package which we put together so that it includes a lot of that other data that you were talking about. And what I would encourage you to do is we're going to release the next version of our mega data base after Christmas, hopefully. And what we're trying to do all the time is pull together data sets to help people understand their local environment. And this is just the sort of shop window of the most obvious bits of it, but the real depth is there in the database. So thanks very much from me.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks all of you. We look forward to taking the report forward with you. Thanks. Bye.